Welcome, everybody, to a special edition of All In with Art Stapleton, a New York Giants podcast brought to you by NorthJersey.com and The Record. I'm your host, Art Stapleton, and we are here in Indianapolis at Radio Row at the Combine. Things are already picking up today. No prospect interviews today, but it's the GMs, select head coaches. Just got out of Joe Schoen's press conference. He did about 10 to 12 minutes at the podium, which I'm sure you've seen quotes from there. Then we did a breakout with Joe Schoen and the local media, and I was a part of that. There are no cameras involved in that, so we have no videos. But we do have some videos of Joe Schoen, so we'll try to get them up, and you'll hopefully be able to enjoy them as part of the podcast. If not today, this show, we'll get it up soon. So on today's show, we'll also have ESPN's Jordan Reid. He was a big part of our QB stories back in December. If you follow Jordan, he is one of the best out there. No frills, just substance. And I think we'll have a good time talking to Jordan, just running everything through the top five, give a little bit of an overview of the draft. So we'll get to that. Joe Schoen, talking points. Of course, we talk to quarterbacks. I come away, they're open to all avenues, which is what they said at the end of the season. I think, Joe Schoen said, I'm all about taking swings at the position. So that to me tells me that they are willing to be involved in anything, and that includes Matthew Stafford. If he becomes available and if they are in position to make a trade, I now believe after talking to Joe Schoen, hearing what he had to say on the podium, or didn't say, and also getting a feel for him, a vibe for him away from the podium, that the Giants are seriously considering a situation with Matthew Stafford if it happens. As I tweeted yesterday, if they get up to the salary numbers that we're talking about for Matthew Stafford at 37 years old, I hope that Joe Schoen changes his policy a little bit in contract structuring and adds some void years to lessen the salary cap hit for this year. We talked about it on yesterday's show on our Combine preview. Let's talk a little bit about Schoen. No problem with quarterbacks not throwing here. That obviously is a lot about Shedeur Sanders. He said he's not necessarily worried about that. He talked off the podium about 3 different phases of their quarterback evaluation. One is on site at the school. One is at all-star games and the combine, the meetings they have, watching the kids. But then it's the official visits. It's when the players come to their building. And he talked about how they kind of have touch points in place where the Giants will set things up, kind of trying to trap players a little bit, test them, see what happens, see if you can make dinner reservations or, be there somewhere on time with a video guy, that kind of thing. Kind of when a player is out doing it, they want to talk to the driver who picks the player up from the airport. That was something interesting earlier this week when Chris Carter was with Kay Adams. He mentioned that about Shedeur Sanders, that he had the driver in a car service after Shedeur had that car service, and what the driver had to say about Shedeur and how professional he was. Everywhere these prospects go, there's some bit of information that's going to frame what they have an opportunity to do. And, I'm convinced more than ever that the Giants are going to draft a quarterback. Will it be in the top 5? I'm not sure. It depends on what happens. Schoen gives the usual GM speak of we can move up, we can move back, all that stuff. I think the Giants are still evaluating their opportunities. But from that perspective, I think that's what they're looking at. So talk to Schoen about that. A couple other things. Said we could talk to Brian Daboll about the offensive play calling at the owners' meetings later this month. Well, later next month, March, the end of March, down in West Palm Beach. We will do that. We'll see what Brian Daboll decides to do, if it's Daboll, if it's Kafka, and how that works out. I asked Joe Schoen about Hard Knocks, and with no other team wanting to do it, the magnifying glass they put themselves under last year? Did it cause him to change anything that they do now? The idea that, maybe we should look at ourselves in a different light. He said, not really. He said, we'll always look at each other, at ourselves and our process and try to evaluate and get better. We'll see if that happens. We may not even find out about that behind the scenes, but I'll certainly dig on that. I asked about the injured players, especially the two most important players that are deep under contract. Andrew Thomas, Dexter Lawrence, both ended last year with season-ending injuries. Schoen joked, he said, you saw Dex at the Pro Bowl games, doing the tug of war, so his elbow is back to 100%, so they have no concerns there. I asked him about Andrew Thomas. He said he's out of a boot. He's working out like a fiend, called him a beast, and what he looks like in the weight room. Interesting part of it, he said Andrew Thomas, John Michael Schmitz are working out at the facility. So they have a group of guys there, Josh Azudu as well, that they're together. On the offensive line, Schoen said he believes they have 4 of their 5 starters back. The one spot is right guard. And I think at this point, they're going to make a play in free agency. That's the sense I got today from hearing Schoen. And that puts Trey Smith, to me, right at the top of the list. Will the Giants break the bank for the Chiefs right guard? He's somebody that went in the 6th round several years ago. I know there were a lot of Giants fans who wanted them to take a chance on Trey Smith, but maybe the timing is right now and better now, even though it's going to cost them a heck of a lot more than what a late-round pick would have, but to be that final piece on this offensive line. As you saw in my mock draft, it's very important that the Giants continue to build the depth on the offensive and defensive lines, so I still expect them to draft offensive linemen and defensive linemen, even if they make plays in free agency. Really, that's kind of the vibe we have from Schoen, that they're willing to spend on a quarterback if they believe that quarterback is going to let them win this year and win forward. So that does put Stafford in play. And I'm sure they've mapped out several different plans as to how they're going to attack quarterback. We'll talk to Jordan Reid about the quarterbacks also. There's this big notion, the idea of, the quarterbacks aren't worth the picks that are there in the top 5, that they should go with Abdul Carter, who speaks tomorrow, Travis Hunter, who speaks on Thursday. We'll have stories on them on NorthJersey.com. Make sure you check them out. And for more on Joe Schoen, we'll have things in terms of where they stand as far as the free agency and the takeaways on the roster and things here this year in a takeaways piece on NorthJersey.com. So those are my takeaways from Schoen this morning. Like I said, not a lot of information, but I think that's, we'll probably be talking about him and what he said in further podcasts, and I'll have some video on further podcasts that you can check out of Joe and some of the best quotes that he had on a later show, probably tomorrow, and we'll go from there. So now, without further ado, let me bring in our guest, Jordan Reid from ESPN. Let's go to that interview. All right, so we're here at the Combine, Radio Row or Podcast Row. Joining me now, my guy, ESPN's Jordan Reid. Jordan, how the heck are you, man?
I'm good, Art. I'm happy to be here, and this is like Christmas for me. This is my time of the year, get to talk about prospects and talk to guys about different teams, but I'm excited.
Nice seeing you shine like the rest of the prospects here in Indy. So
thank you, I appreciate it.
It's interesting. Let's get into it. I talked to you back in December. We talked Shador, we talked Cam Ward, but we didn't really talk about the rest of the guys in the top 5 because it was really more of a quarterback selection for the Giants back then. Take me through your process a little bit. We know Abdul Carter and we know Travis Hunter.
Yep.
Are those guys too good to pass up, even if you're in a situation where the Giants are needing a quarterback. What's your take on that?
Well, I think they have to get a quarterback, Art, just because they're in the situation now where their backs are against the wall. And, Malik Neighbors is a great player. There were some arguments that if they should take a quarterback last year. They ended up not doing that. But now their feet are to the fire and they have to take a quarterback just because they have to win next year. But, top of the draft, you have Cam Ward, you have Shedeur Sanders. But after that, it gets really tricky, especially with the Giants at number 3. Now, if they were at number 2, it would be completely different. But now with only 2 quarterbacks being at the top of the draft, I'm really interested to see what happens.
Now, let's talk Carter and Hunter a little bit. We can take one at a time. Let's go Carter first because everybody knew the Heisman Trophy winner. Everybody's talked about Travis Hunter. What has been the climb like for Abdul Carter from the beginning of the season until now in your eyes and your evaluation?
Well, he was an off-ball linebacker his first 2 years at Penn State, but the athleticism always popped with him. You always saw that on his tape. But with the transition to defensive end, we never knew when the light was going to turn on for him. But it was the 4th game of the season when they played Illinois. I believe he had 2 sacks in that game. That was the aha moment for him of where he understood, like, hey, I understand now how to use my hands. I can race past people. I can beat them underneath. I can beat them over the top. There's so many different ways that I can defeat offensive tackles. So that game was really the one where I thought the light really turned on for him. And then in the college football playoff on a national stage for everybody to see him, that's where things just took off for him.
And then he gets banged up with the shoulder. Yep. So, who knows where Penn State or what they would have done if he were at 100%. In terms of prospects at an edge guy, whether it's an off-ball linebacker, however you see him, defensive end, the guys you have graded and watched over the last couple of years, where does Carter fit in there? People throw around Micah Parsons' name. That's lofty, obviously. But because of Penn State, where does Abdul Carter fit for you in terms of your evaluation?
I think that's a fair comparison for him. And it's not just that he went to Penn State and he's wearing number 11, but we're talking about somebody similar to Micah that originally was an all-ball linebacker and then transitioned to that defensive end spot. Now, Micah didn't make the transition until he got to the NFL, but just speaking of the traits, the athleticism and the explosiveness that Abdul Carter does have, and he's in a similar body type as Micah Parsons. So I think he could be that type of player on the next level. And we're talking about somebody walking through the door as a rookie that can be a 12-plus sack guy right away.
So that answers the next question, the idea of, is this a guy, regardless of what you have at edge rusher or up front, that you just say, you know what, run the card up because he's that good?
Well, if neither quarterback is on the board for them, I personally would prefer Travis Hunter just because I have him ranked as my top-ranked player overall, regardless of position in this year's draft. But I'm not going to be mad at him if they take Abdul Carter. I don't think you can go wrong with either player. But let's say Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders in some order go number 1 and number 2. I think that's when you take Abdul Carter or Travis. But I personally would take Travis Hunter first.
So when you talk one more on Carter in terms of what he showed by moving up front and playing more defensive end. What about his game? And we see the explosiveness, but what do you like about the growth in his game over the last couple of years?
It's just it's oxymoron, but the control violence that he plays with and the aggression that he plays with, he's really good with his hands. And you have to remember, this was his very first year playing defensive end. So 3 to 4 years from now, there's no telling how good he can be. So it's the combination of the athletic traits, the explosiveness, and then the potential upside that he has.
That's what I was going to say. You talk about, when Kayvon Thibodeau came out, there was the idea of, what we would see from his athleticism and that kind of thing, whether or not it would jump. But there's always that idea of the technique, the pass rush technique. Yeah. And can a guy take his game from, I'm a great athlete and I can beat guys in college, to can I beat a left tackle who's being paid, $25 million a year to stop me? Is Carter basically in a situation where there's potential there that we have not seen yet because he's going to grow technically as a pass rusher?
Well, I think he's much looser of an athlete than what Kayvon was too. What I mean by looser is that just the body functionality with him, he can bend a little more and he's much looser in his lower half. You see him cornering around those offensive tackles, and I think the hand maturity is much further along than what Thibodeau's was coming out to. So the athleticism, the ability to bend, and then also just the value that it provides in coverage as well. I think that's an underrated aspect about his game. So him being a closer, being able to get that production.
Let's talk Hunter. You mentioned Travis. I know I talked a little bit with you back in December. Why is he your number 1 player on the board?
my face just lights up when I get to talk about him. I just think he's so rare, Art. He's a player that, and I was young, but just being a football historian, the player that he reminds me of is Champ Bailey when he was coming out of Georgia in the late 90s. And if you remember, Champ played both ways. He played receiver and he played corner. He was averaging over 100 snaps a game as well, and he's wearing a gold jacket in the NFL now. But with Travis, I would play him on the defensive side full time, and then I would sprinkle in maybe 20 to 25 plays a game with him at receiver. So just imagine teams game planning for Malik Neighbors and Travis Hunter. And that also solves the Giants' question mark at wide receiver 2 behind Malik Neighbors right now. So I just think just the rare ability that he has as a zone corner, and then also just the playmaking ability that he has as a wide receiver, I just think he has a limitless upside.
How much do you see? Because we don't hear much about it because we'll obviously get to Coach Prime in a little bit, talking about another Sanders. But you're talking about, to me, I mean, no question he's the best corner of his generation. Maybe reinvented the position with what Deion was able to do. Him being his coach and coaching him, is there a technical side from a cornerback perspective that maybe we don't see because people don't talk about that with Deion, that maybe you've seen breaking down Travis as a corner?
Well, I think that was part of the sales pitch for him to first go to Jackson State and eventually to Colorado. I believe Travis really saw himself in Deion just talking about a fantastic athlete that had to get away from what I like to call out-athleting everybody and playing with technique and not relying so much on instincts. And that's what we saw with the growth of him from Jackson State to Colorado. Just because I thought at Jackson State he was relying a ton on just his athletic instincts. But at Colorado, you started to see him notice concepts on the offensive side, but also as a receiver being able to read and react to coverage on the run, but also understanding what defenders were going to do to him. So just raising his football IQ and awareness, I think that's where Coach Prime really came in handy, but also teaching him the technical aspects of playing defensive back and not just relying so much on his athletic instincts.
All right, let's get to the quarterbacks. You and I both talked in December, and you had the line to me that I thought really just kind of laid it out as simply and as effectively as possible, is that, Shedeur had the higher floor, and there was no question that Cam Ward had the higher ceiling. Now, you have Cam Ward as your number one quarterback. Since we always talk about Shedeur first, let's talk about Cam a little bit. What do you like about Cam that maybe the average person doesn't see when they turn on the games on the weekends?
Well, first, I love his mentality. And we're talking about an under-recruited player, 0-star recruit, was in a wing T offense in high school. So he was throwing the ball at most 10 times a game. He goes to Incarnate Word in the FCS ranks, absolutely lights it up, wins every award imaginable, wins a ton of games, challenges himself to go to the FBS level at Washington State and had a similar effect on that team as well. And then at Miami, we saw the effect that he had on that program as one of the best quarterbacks in that illustrious program's history. We know the players that have come out of there, not just from a quarterback standpoint, but the players that they have had. So just the mentality that he has, always keeping the underdog mentality, but also just how well his traits translate to the next level. What I mean by that is quarterbacks have to be able to not only operate inside of the pocket, but also outside of the pocket as well. I'm not saying that Cam is going to beat these guys on the next level, but when I think of the playmaking aspect with Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, they have the ability to make offensive coordinators right, even if they're in the wrong play call, just because of their ability to create plays outside of structure. And then with Cam, I believe he has to have a very demanding position coach and offensive coordinator like a Brian Daboll, just because, and the way I've been putting it to everybody is that coaches want you to jump off that 10 to 15 foot high dive. Sometimes he gets curious and he wants to jump off that 25 or 30 foot high dive. So just because he gets curious, and there's a lot of plays within games that make you go, man, what the heck was he thinking on that one? But that's just the life of a playmaker.
So, I had the chance to meet Cam, at least on the other side of the table at the Heisman weekend. And he certainly seems like a kid who, could handle, he's at the U. I mean, he can handle the spotlight to an extent. And obviously, it's funny because on most years, people would probably look at Cam and say, oh, he's getting all the spotlight. But then you flip it to Shedeur, and there's no comparison to the kind of spotlight that comes with Shedeur. And I thought you nailed it to me, and you said, the idea of, people see Shedeur and they expect to see Deion, and it's not the same he's not Dion at quarterback. How much do you, when you're talking to people out there and people are asking you for opinions, how much do you think there's that misconception as to who Shedeur is? And I'll hit you with this one. It hit me last night. Shedeur strikes me as the pocket passer. He's not the unicorn that you mentioned, Josh Allen, that kind of thing. So, like, in a past time in the NFL, I think what Shedeur does well might have gotten more praise than what it actually gets now, because now we're looking at quarterbacks differently. We want quarterbacks to be Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. We want to be that guy. Tell me about your thoughts on that and Shedeur and, just the myth and the legend that has become Shedeur.
Well, just backing up to your first question, to the naked eye, if we were matching up Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, everybody would guess that Travis Hunter would be Deion's son just because of the athleticism. But Shedeur, he has everything that you want from an in-the-pocket standpoint. And as a quarterback, that's the first aspect that you have to master in order to have success in the NFL. So he already has that in his back pocket. And I think he's being very underrated in that aspect. Does he need to get the ball out quicker? Yes. Does he need to stop retreating, and having some of those unnecessary sacks? Yes. But as far as what he's done from in the pocket, the resume speaks for itself. 74% completion percentage, which was the best in the country. We know the fourth quarter opportunities that he has been in, and he's been successful in a lot of those. So from an in the pocket standpoint, I think he is very polished.
I know guys focus on rankings and where you had guys evaluated, and all that is all well and good, and I respect that. When you hear people saying that, Shedeur is overrated and Shedeur is this and Shedeur is that, where do you fall on the idea of your past evaluations, what you see from Shedeur? And I think you told me in December that, you wouldn't be surprised if Shedeur is a top 15 quarterback. But whether or not he can get to top 8, top 5, that's a different story. And if that's an important component of whether you pick that quarterback in the top 5, then that's what you truly have to consider. Is that how you see it? Why is Shedeur not the terrible player that everyone says he is?
Well, I will say this, Art. I think there can be a lot of preconceived notions or envy about Shedeur just because of who his father is. And you can't let that cloud your evaluation of Shedeur Sanders. So you have to separate him from his father and just evaluate the prospect. And if we're just evaluating the prospect, I believe Shedeur is really polished from the pocket. He has really good anticipation, and he has great ball placement as well. So you just have to throw your preconceived notions, whatever they are, throw those out the window and just be fair and evaluate him.
Is that hard to do?
Not for me, but for some people in the media, it can be. So that's just something I don't really understand.
In terms of the overall draft, obviously you're digging into it this week. What impresses you most about this draft class? I've heard a lot about the defensive linemen. Is this one of those things where you could see a guy drafted in the second round or the third round that turns out to be the best interior defensive lineman in the class that goes behind some of these guys that may be in the first round?
So when I was talking about this on SportsCenter a couple of days ago, this is the best defensive line class that I've seen since 2019. And if you remember, that was the Dexter Lawrence class. But some other names in that class: Nick Bosa, Jeffrey Simmons, Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns. There's so many names. Montez Sweat is another name that was in there. So many names that were in that draft class. We could get as many as 10 to 12 defensive linemen drafted in this year's draft class. So if the Giants are looking maybe to dip their toes in the water of taking one of these talented defensive linemen, with a day 2 or day 3 pick, I definitely think they should do that, just because not only is it loaded in the front end, but also it's loaded in the mid and late rounds too.
Dex, I've been pounding the table saying, get him a young player to groom next to him. If you're looking day 2, give me a guy or guys that you would like and say, his game matches up with what Dex does, what the Giants want to do up front would really, Dex's presence would help anyone, but this guy would be a guy to keep an eye on.
Darius Alexander out of Toledo, he's one that was really impressive to me at the Senior Bowl. Okay. And he's somebody I think is going to carry over into the NFL as well. And you can play him any spot you want to up front. He's about 6'4", about 310, 315 pounds. He's one I expect to test really well here at the Combine as well. And then another is Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State. If they want a bigger body to complement with Dexter Lawrence out of Ohio State, he's one I definitely would be interested in as well.
Does it surprise you? You mentioned Dex, you mentioned Brian Burns, then we know Thibodeau's top 5 pick, whatever people want to debate. I mean, we all thought last year, this should be a dominant defensive front with these guys. I mean,
they have,
is it one of those things where it's, you can get one or two pieces in this draft, and all of a sudden it goes from just names to now these guys are really producing?
Yeah, I think so. And we just saw with the Philadelphia Eagles, you can never have too many defensive linemen. You want to throw those guys in waves at quarterback. So even though they have a lot of names, I still would continue to throw resources at it just because you can never have too many players at that position.
Last one for you, size up. I know you're not necessarily a mock draft guy, but everything you've talked to, people you've talked to, Giants are sitting there at 3.
Yeah.
Who's going to be on the board for them? What do you think? What's your gut tell you right now with a lot of evaluation on the team's end still to go?
Yeah. I'm hoping one of the quarterbacks are there for them. If I had to guess right now, I think one of them is going to be on the board, and that one will be Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado. And if he's there on the board, I definitely think they should take him just because they have to come out of this draft with a quarterback somehow.
People say shop hungry. Would that be shopping hungry, or do you think need meets desperation, meets a guy who can actually stand up to the task at hand?
Well, it doesn't matter just because they're starving. Their bones are showing right now, and their ribs just because they're starving for a quarterback. So, yes, they're shopping hungry, but they're starving right now for a quarterback.
Tell me where everybody can find you this week. I know turn on ESPN, you'll be everywhere, but any specific spots where you're doing big stuff?
Yeah, so I'll be on SportsCenter every day covering the Combine, so you can find me on that on all platforms. I have a mock draft actually coming out after the Combine, March 4th, Tuesday.
Okay.
So that'll be up. It'll be 2 rounds. Actually, that'll be up on ESPN Plus. So be on the lookout for that. You can also find me on Twitter at Jordan_Reid. That's JORDAN_REID.
And this is not a guy who's just putting mock drafts out for page views. This is a guy who gets page views.
It has to be what I'm hearing.
He's putting it out there. So, again, always, this is the guy, Jordan Reid. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate it.
Thanks as always, Art.
All right, so that wraps up a Tuesday here at the Combine. We are here at Radio Row. We got tables everywhere, and we are raring to go. Prospects tomorrow, 8 a.m. Abdul Carter from Penn State kicks things off. I will be at his podium. We will try to have some video of him for the podcast, and we'll have another guest. We're slated so far. Here are the guests that we're looking at. Dane Brugler from The Athletic, Emory Hunt from CBS, Connor Rogers from NBC, trying to get Jordan Rodriguez from The Athletic to talk about Matthew Stafford. Sam Whalen, I told you yesterday, that's going to be fun, talking to him about reality TV. He was on Survivor last year. Also, what the Titans are doing with that number 1 overall pick. Is it in play for a team like the Giants that might be looking to go? So, for producer Paul Wood, for Jordan Reid, I'm Art Stapleton. Thanks for watching today's show. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We will be back for another show tomorrow here from Indianapolis.